For those of you who aren't able to come to the Vacaville Bible Art Journaling Collaborative group in January, we did a practice session, I guess, trying basic watercolor techniques. And so for those of you who missed, I wanted you to have a way to kind of learn that. And this is really the introduction to watercolor and a way to start playing around with it so you learn how it moves and applies to the paper. There's a lot of watercolor tutorials on YouTube. Most of them are going to show you techniques on watercolor paper, and watercolor reacts differently on our Bible pages. And so we practiced in the group in January on cutout dictionary pages, and that's what this is too, because they have a similar thickness and texture as the Bible pages that we journal on. So the very basics, and I'll talk a little bit more about product after I do some demonstration. The first thing we're going to learn are some different wet on wet techniques, is what they call it, because you wet the page and you wet the paint and put the wet paint on the wet paper. So wet on wet. So the very first thing we're going to do is just a flat wash, which means you're basically going for all one color across the whole page. And so this makes a good background for doing lettering over the top, or some stamping over the top, or painting over the top with acrylics. You can do a lot of different things once you have this background done. Or you could do the lettering first and then do the wash over lettering if you're using a waterproof ink. What I'm doing here, I wet the whole page first, and then I'm going to get my paintbrush into my watercolor, and I'll show you real quick here that I'm just using a really inexpensive student set from Michael's Artist Loft, and just getting my brush nice and sopped with color. And then I'm just going to drag across, and I have a blotter under, just a piece of paper to catch any of my excess, and I'll probably have to change that a dozen times during the post, but basically you're just taking one color and going straight across all the way down and just keeping it even. You can see how watercolor is known for the way it blooms, is what they call it, when it reacts with the water and kind of goes where it wants to go. It puddles. You can see as my page is getting a little dry down here that I have to add some more water. Just keep it nice and wet. And although we're going for only one color on this page, you can see how the watercolor just reacts a little differently to where the puddles are. And so you get this gradation of color, light and dark, and that is a very basic wash. The next wash we're going to do, again, a wet on wet. All the first ones will be wet on wet. When you're watercoloring, you want 2 cups of water, usually. One to clean your brush, and then one to put clear water on your brush so that you're really sure you're not transferring the color. So now we're gonna do a variegated or gradient wash that you might hear it called an ombre wash, because you're gonna fade 2 colors into each other. So again, we're gonna wet the whole page, and I'm using this nice wide brush for this because there's no real detail in this. Just get it nice and wet. And then you want to pick 2 colors from the color wheel that are close together on the color wheel. Colors that are close together are analogous colors. If they should run together, they're sort of going to stay in the same color family. And if you go with the color directly across and you try to put those 2 together, they are complementary colors and they look good together. But in the case of watercolor, when watercolor touches watercolor, it it tends to blend together, and if you're using complementary colors, it's going to make brown, and so we say your painting will get muddy, literally look like mud, because those complementary colors are always going to make brown, blue and orange, purple and yellow. I'm going to go really heavy with the pigment on the top, and I'm going to come back down about 1/3 of the page, and then I'm going to wash my brush out again really good. And I'm going to pick another color from the bottom. Again, I'm going to look for something analogous, something close to the orange on the color wheel. So I'm going to go with yellow and a heavy pigment on the bottom, and come up about 1/3 of the page. Okay, and then I can just kind of keep going with this yellow. The darker the color, the less of it you need. So in this one, the orange is much darker than the yellow, and so I'm going to go a little heavier on the yellow, and then I'll go back in and get a little bit of the light with the orange and just bring it down in there, and you can see how the color is kind of blending together there in the middle. So I just washed my brush, and I just want to go ahead and darken this orange a little bit more so we see the difference in the gradation in the middle, and then just kind of give it a little more here. Okay. On watercolor paper, the paint will run very nicely, and so you can actually, you know, typically what we do is paint the top and paint the bottom, and then just kind of swirl it around to get the paint to move to the middle. The Bible pages absorb the paint a lot quicker, and so you may have to manipulate it with your brush more. The next one we're going to do is just based off of that last one we did. I'm just going to show you that you can do 2 colors like I just did, or you can do multiple colors with a variegated wash. So again, wet on wet, so we're getting the page all wet first. Just gonna drag my paintbrush across, and I'm gonna do more than 2 colors this time. So I'll do some here, one more here, and you could literally do, you know, all the colors of the rainbow down the page. So I'm going to go in with our orange, clean my brush good again, and then do a yellow. And the yellow and the pink are going to kind of make a version of orange as well, and so this kind of works. Again, these are all analogous on one side of the color wheel, all in the red, orange, yellow family. If I were to start introducing some green next to the yellow, that would be fine, but if I introduce it next to the pink or the orange, it's going to make it brown. Okay, so that's a multicolored variegated wash, and this is really fun to do. And you, like I was saying, you could literally do, you know, pink and then purple and then blue and then green, you know, as long as they're those analogous colors and you're not mixing the complementary, you're going to get a nice wash. This next one is kind of fun. I use my acrylic block. This is a different type of variegated wash in that it's kind of splotchy, and this is my acrylic block for stamping, and I use it for a palette, but you could use packaging, plastic, so that would work too. In the class we used old CDs, and although the hole in the middle can kind of give you a little trouble, it did work, and everybody gave it a try, which was good. So what we're going to do for this, again, we're still on a wet on wet technique. I'm going to wet the whole page again. So if you want a very blended look, you're going to want to do the wet on wet. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about the wet on dry. Okay, so what I'm going to do with my palette is I'm going to pick analogous colors again. And I'm just going to put some splotches on here, a little bit apart, completely random in how you put them on. So some purple. We'll do some pink. I hope my lighting is okay. I have the craziest setup here. I have my phone on a drum because I don't have a tripod. I have 2 desk lamps. So we're just going for it because it's what we have, right? Let's see. I need one more color. I think I'm going to do a blue because, again, they're all kind of on that side of the family. Blue and purple and red. And I'm smushing it on there. And you can see it puddles up, but that's okay. If you're doing this and you feel like you're going a little bit slow about it and your paint starts to dry, you can get these little misters. So wet the page, wet the canvas, and then you can drag it, you can drop it and smush it, you can stamp it a couple of times like this. And you see how you get this very mottled effect and it kind of runs and puddles, and that's the fun of watercolor, is that it kind of has a life of its own. So you can see that. Another type of watercolor that works really well with this sort of smushing splotchy technique are the Tim Holtz Distress Inks. They're actually a watercolor in a stamp pad, and they are very reactive with water. Different kinds of watercolor react or re-react with water differently. Some of them are more reactive than others. So say once it's dry, you can come back in and add another layer of color, and some watercolors will not, they'll stay dried and solid, and then the next color layer you go over the top will be completely separate, and they'll both be translucent. Some watercolors, like these Tim Holtz Distress Inks, and these are the little ones, I love the little ones, they're very reactive with water. So once they dry, if you put water on them again, they're gonna blend again. They're gonna react with the water. So they're kind of fun to play with watercolor techniques like this splotching one. So I'm just gonna stamp some splotches on there. That's the this one's called Seedless Preserve. This one is Picked Raspberry. It's a pink. They have funny names. Make me hungry. Well, this one won't. Salty Ocean. Okay. So just so I don't, when I stamp it, well, I guess if you really wanted that look of squares, you could just stamp it this way. I want it to be more splotchy, so I'm going to give it a little spritz with my water. I'll show you 2 different with this. One is wet on, this will be the wet on wet. That's the wet on wet. That would make like a beautiful starry night sky. Okay, and then I'm going to show you what happens when I do it wet on dry. And I like to do streaks with this, so I'll pull it. Woo! So you can see it's just a little bit different look to both the streaking or the splotching dry on the dry paper versus on the wet paper. Okay, this next technique we're going to do will kind of teach you a little bit about what watercolor does as far as watercolor really wants to stay only where the water is, and so you can do letters or a stencil like this, and I'm going to show you how it will sort of stay within the boundaries of where you put the water. So I'm just going to do a quick trace with pencil, and the graphite in the pencil will react with the water, and once it's wet you really can't erase it. So if you're not using a dark color that's going to cover up your pencil marks, I will often, I'll either try and do it really light to start with, or I'll go back in. This is a Kneadable Art Eraser. It doesn't shred like a normal eraser. When you're erasing, you get all that all the pieces that come off of the eraser and you have to brush them aside. These Kneadable Art Erasers don't do that, and if they kind of pick up all the graphite, and you can erase chalk with them, you can erase a lot of things with them, and to get them sort of clean again, you just stretch them like this. It's kind of fun to play with. But anyway, when I'm trying to get my pencil really light, if I want to use a light color with it and don't want the pencil to really show, I will just dab like this and make my line. I can still see it, but it doesn't stand out quite as much. It'll be easier to blend it into the paint. So I can still see it. I don't know if you can. The thing about watercolor is wherever the water is, the paint will stay, and it won't really run where the water isn't. So when you're painting a watercolor, I was kind of explaining to the ladies that when you're painting a flower, say with 3 petals, you will want to paint the 2 petals that are not touching first and let them dry, and then you can go back and paint the petal in the middle. Because if you try and paint them all at the same time, they're going to run together and be one giant blob. So what I'm doing here is I'm just running the edge of my brush like right along the edge of the pencil mark. And you can see if you just sort of drag your brush to the side. This is probably a bit big brush for this, but I'm just being lazy and not changing. So if you keep your brush at an angle and not straight up and down, you can just kind of drag it to the side and it will let you get a nice sharp edge. Okay, so once I have that, I think I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit smaller brush for this. Now I'm going to drop in some color, just little dabs, and you can see how it spreads where the water is. And I may need to, I probably didn't get quite enough water on there. So I'm going to put just a little more. Try not to spread this paint that I just dropped in, because I want the water to spread it, not my brush. And this kind of gives you a, I think it looks a little bit tie-dye-ish, but. So I'm just going to drop in some color. And again, you can do just one color here, or you could do more than one. I think I'm going to do more than one. Again, choosing analogous colors from the same side of the color wheel. I guess I'm kind of feeling pink and purple today. Valentine's is coming before we know it. It's already February. And we have a group in February meeting. We're hoping to meet the second Saturday each month for our group to try new things, learn from each other, encourage each other, share what this is doing for our faith, being in the Word more. For me personally, it's like I have to absorb the Word more deeply in order to come up with the visual piece to put in the Bible art journaling. And so I really have to concentrate on what it's saying, and I find that instead of just reading it quickly and then moving on, it's really sinking in, soaking in for me in a whole new way. And so I just love this.